Hello YouTube, and welcome to my channel. I am Benedict the 17th, and today we are tackling the big question, are traps gay? For those who don't know, a trap refers to a young male who looks and dresses as an attractive female. The trap question refers to the debate surrounding whether it would be gay for a man to knowingly engage in sexual congress with a trap. This question popped up on a 4chan thread in 2015, and for some reason has remained a big deal on the internet ever since. In this video, I intend to demonstrate conclusively that it is gay. To do so, I will demonstrate that both modern homosexuality as it is understood in the US and traps as they come to us from Japanese anime originated from the same source, German sexologists and British Iranians in the late 19th and early 20th century. Furthermore, by doing so, I will demonstrate that modern homosexuality is not a natural phenomenon. It was invented and used as a form of cultural propaganda. So let's begin. To answer the question of whether traps are gay, we must understand that the idea of homosexuality as a sexual identity is very modern. It is a reaction against and descendant of the medical model of homosexuality. Both of these models insist that homosexuality is an inborn and unchanging character trait. This belief is a central tenet of modern gay culture. It might be tempting to think that this understanding of homosexuality has always existed, but that is not the case. If we look at ancient and medieval sources from Europe, Japan, and the Middle East, there is copious literature regarding homosexual behavior, but never a homosexual identity or person. Homosexual intercourse was often seen either as a formal part of a young man's upbringing in male society, such as in Sparta or Japan, simply another kind of prostitution, as in the ancient Middle East, or as a substitution for heterosexual intercourse when that wasn't available, such as in China. Nowhere throughout the literature is there any consideration of exclusive homosexual attractions or relationships in lieu of heterosexual ones. If you're interested in researching this for yourself, a good place to start would be Richard Burton's terminal essay and his satirical discussion of the Satatic Zone. So if that is the case, then where did the modern understanding of homosexuality and gayness originate? The answer is in Germany and England in the late 19th century. At the height of the Victorian era, we see the formation of an alliance between the gay aesthetes of Oxbridge and the sexologists of Germany. All modern gay activism traces back to these sources. For example, if you were to ask someone who the most significant gay rights politician in America was, and they knew their history, they would probably answer Harvey Milk, the New York native who moved to San Francisco and won a seat as a city supervisor there, was the first homosexual elected to political office in the United States. Before moving to San Francisco, Harvey Milk was involved with a man 10 years his junior by the name of Craig Rodwell. Craig Rodwell is a gay rights icon in his own right. He helped organize the first Pride Parade in New York City, and in his early activism, he was involved with the sit-in at Orange Julius and the Stonewall Riot, the Fort Sumter of the gay rights movement in the United States. Of great concern to Milk was Rodwell's involvement in the New York Mattachine Society, one of the earliest gay rights organizations in the United States. The Mattachine Society was founded in 1955 by one Tony Segura. Tony Segura became politically active after reading The Homosexual in America by Donald Webster Corey. He even said that it was this 1951 book that gave him the sense of homosexuals as a group. Now, if you were to try to find a Mr. Donald Webster Corey, you would be at a loss, because DWC was a pseudonym used by Dr. Edward Sagarin. Now, Sagarin had a number of interesting connections, including Evelyn Hooker and Christopher Isherwood. But perhaps the most interesting is that after graduating high school, he spent a year in France where he met French author André Gide. Gide had accepted his attraction to boys in 1893 on a trip to North Africa. In his journals he wrote, Ali flung his coat and rug down on the sloping sand. He flung himself down too and stretched on his back. I was not such a simpleton as to misunderstand his invitation. But it was only after his friendship with Oscar Wilde in 1895, whom he met in Paris and Algiers, that he understood his attraction as an identity. And with Oscar Wilde, we are firmly within the Uranian movement. Oscar Wilde studied under Walter Pater. Pater famously had a romance with a 19-year-old undergraduate, William Hardinge, who was an open homosexual and was in fact known as the Balliol Bugger. Oscar Wilde famously had an affair with Lord Alfred Douglas, nicknamed Bosie, which led to his arrest. Wilde and Bosie were members of the Order of Sharona, a secret society of homosexuals aimed at promoting the cause. The rules of purpose stated that the order was to be a religion, a theory of life, an ideal for duty, although its purpose was primarily political. Members of the order were brothers of the faith, and were required to swear under the service of initiation that you will never vex or persecute lovers, and that all real love shall be to you as sanctuary. They also both contributed to The Chameleon, a one-issue literary magazine promoting homosexuality. Most interestingly, Oscar Wilde knew Wilhelm von Gloeden personally. Von Gloeden was a photographer who would circulate nude photographs of young boys among the homosexual subculture in Britain and Europe. With von Gloeden, we arrive at our first British-German connection. Von Gloeden contributed to Der Eigen, the first gay journal in the world, published by Adolf Brand. Adolf Brand was a member of the Scientific Humanitarian Committee, a foundation that campaigned for the social recognition of gay, bisexual, and transgender people. Apart from the scientific research and political advocacy, it also was involved in social events like this ball. It was founded by Magnus Hirschfeld, a German sexologist who was world-renowned for his studies in sexuality and his promotion of homosexuality. He is the man indicated by the red circle who is holding hands with a much younger man in drag. Hirschfeld was incredibly important to this story. In fact, he was called the Einstein of sex, but we will return to him later. For now, it's important to know that Hirschfeld extensively quoted and referenced an earlier German sexologist, Karl Heinrich Ulrich. Ulrich was born in Ulrichs in Lower Saxony, then part of the Kingdom of Hanover. Ulrich recalled that as a young child he wore girls' clothes, preferred playing with girls, and wanted to be a girl. His first homosexual experience was in 1839 at the age of 14 when his riding instructor sexually abused him. He came out to his family and began writing treatises on homosexuality, arguing that it was an inborn condition and therefore should not be punished by law. In 1870, he published Araxes, a call to free the nature of the Urning from penal law, which would be remarkable for its similarity to modern gay rights rhetoric, except that, as we have seen, modern gay rights rhetoric descends directly from him, and others who adopted his research, like Hirschfeld and the Scientific Humanitarian Committee, and those who popularized it, like Wilde and the Uranians. Ulrich is recognized as the first gay man in world history. Thus, we can connect the modern gay rights movement in the US, person by person, sexual liaison by sexual liaison, all the way back to the 19th century sexologists and Uranians who invented modern homosexuality. Now you might say, just because we can connect Harvey Milk to them, doesn't mean that everyone is connected to them. That's true. So let's look at another curious connection. We already talked about the New York Mattkind Society, but that wasn't the first Mattkind Society. The first one was the Los Angeles branch, which was founded by Harry Hay Jr. Because of his activism, Hay has been described as the founder of the modern gay movement and the founder of gay liberation. Harry Hay, born in 1912, actually has a direct connection to the Uranians. He was a voracious reader, and in 1923 he began to volunteer at a public library. There he discovered a copy of Edward Carpenter's book, The Intermediate Sex. Reading it, he discovered the word homosexual for the first time and came to recognize that he was gay. Edward Carpenter was a Uranian and a socialist who was influenced by Engels. Carpenter was connected to the Uranians by Havelock Ellis and John Addington Symonds. He was also a member of the British Society for the Study of Sex Psychology. But ignoring the fact that Harry Hay is connected to the Uranians through this book, there is an even more interesting connection. But before we get there, let's discuss a few other things about him. He was introduced to Marxism as a teen by fellow ranch hands who were members of the Industrial Workers of the World, or Wobblies. They gave him books and pamphlets written by Karl Marx, leading to his adoption of socialism. He later joined the Communist Party. This exposure to socialism led him to believe that homosexuals constituted a cultural minority. Hay argued that homosexuals had a common language and psychological makeup manifested in a community. two of the four criteria that Joseph Stalin used in his work, Marxism and the Natural Question, to define a nation. Now, in 1926, at the age of 14, he met and had sex with a 25-year-old merchant sailor named Matt, who introduced him to the idea of gay men as a global secret brotherhood. He must have kept this idea in the back of his mind because in 1929 he met a man at a local cruising spot who had been the lover of a man involved with the short-lived Chicago-based Society for Human Rights. This unnamed man inspired Hay to found the Mattakine Society by telling him about this Society for Human Rights. This earlier society was founded in 1924 by a Mr. Henry Gerber. Gerber was a German expat who immigrated to the U.S. with his parents when he was in his early 20s. When the United States declared war on Germany, Gerber chose to enlist in the army and he was sent to Germany. While there, Gerber learned about Magnus Hirschfeld and the work he and his scientific humanitarian committee were doing to reform anti-homosexual German law. Inspired by Hirschfeld's work, when he returned to the U.S., he founded the Society of Human Rights. The society had as its mission to promote and protect the interests of people who, by reasons of mental and physical abnormalities, are abused and hindered in the legal pursuit of happiness, which is guaranteed to them by the Declaration of Independence, and to combat the public prejudices against them by dissemination of factors according to modern science among intellectuals of mature age. The society stands only for law and order. It is in harmony with any and all general laws insofar as they protect the rights of others and does in no manner recommend any acts of violation in present law, nor advocate any manner inimical to public welfare. Though this society eventually ran afoul of the law and was shut down, this was the society that inspired Harry Hay Jr. Again, we can trace an early father of the U.S. homosexual movement back to Magnus Hirschfeld. Want another? Evelyn Hooker was an American psychologist. She is important to the United States homosexual movement because her work on homosexual psychology led to it being declassified as a mental illness in 1973. She became friends with and eventually landlady to Christopher Isherwood, an English-American author who had a number of liaisons with men including W.H. Auden and a teenage Don Bachardy at the age of 48. Christopher Isherwood was the one who challenged her to scientifically study people like him. In 1931, Isherwood was introduced to E.M. Forster, a homosexual British author. He was connected to the Uranians through Siegfried Sassoon, who knew Wilfred Owen, and the author Forrest Reed. However, we can also know that he was influenced by his friend Edward Carpenter, who was the inspiration for Forster's gay novel Maurice. Edward Carpenter, you might remember, is the same Uranian whose book The Intermediate Sex was read by U.S. activist Harry Hay. Again, the U.S. homosexual movement was invented by British pederasts of the late 19th and early 20th century. I could go on. Charles Baker, designer of the rainbow flag, was friends with Harvey Milk, whom we already traced back. Prescott Townsend, early activist against sodomy laws in Boston, had a relationship with Elliot Paul, who introduced him to André Gide. Jack Nichols, another early activist, was influenced by the same Dr. Sagarin that influenced Tony Segura. But I think my point is made. Every U.S. homosexual activist was directly influenced by the German sexologists and British pederasts of the late Victorian and early Edwardian era who invented modern homosexuality. Now, why is this important to the question of whether traps are gay? Well, let's look at how these inventors of homosexuality described the boys to whom they were attracted. William Johnson Corey, author of Ionica, the first Uranian work, included the following lines in his poems, from a study of boyhood. O bards that call to bank and glen, my lady nature dwells in the heart of men. Wilfred Owens wrote, Now let me feel the feeling of thy hand, for it is softer than the breast of girls, and warmer than the pillows of their cheeks, and richer than the fullness of their eyes, and stronger than the ardor of their hearts. Or from Edwin Emmanuel Bradford's In Quest of Love, Not woman's love that passeth by, nor the world's love so near akin, nor love of that low self within, more base than both, but throned on high, sexless, eternal, free from sin, unvexed by passion, wholly mild, pure, spiritual, undefiled, is that sweet love I yearn to win. Or, from Richard Burton's terminal essay, Boys are handsome only when they resemble women. Boys are likened to girls because folks say yonder boy is like a girl. And describing a practice of the Konyagas tribe, he says, a Kadiak mother will select her handsomest and most promising boy and dress and rear him as a girl, teaching him only domestic duties, keeping him at women's work, associating him with women in order to render his effeminacy complete. Finally, in Stories Toto Told Me by Frederick Rolfe, we have this scene where the servant boy brings the girl he would like to marry to his master in order to secure his blessing. I said I was prepared for anything, but I confessed to a little gasp at what I saw. It was not a boy and girl who approached me, but a couple of boys, apparently at least. This seeming boy, whom he called Beatrice, looked about 14 years old, and far more delicately dainty even than he was. Well, sir, you see, I thought if Beatrice came to live with us, with me, I mean, it would be much more convenient if she looked like the rest of us, because then she would be able to do things for you, and people will not talk. It struck me immediately that Toto was right, again, as usual. For upon my word, this girl would pass anywhere for a very pretty boy, with just the plump roundness of the Florentine Apollino, and no more. These references are just some examples of a common set of themes in Uranian literature in comparing young boys to girls or women, or describing boys dressed as girls, or vice versa. So even within the Uranians, we already have trap-like themes and characters. But there's even clearer evidence of the relationship between traps and the Uranians. Now, if you remember, one of the key figures we talked about before was Magnus Hirschfeld, the sexologist who founded the Scientific Humanitarian Committee in 1897 in Germany. Now, an interesting thing happened in Japan about that time. Following the Perry expedition that opened Japan up to the rest of the world after years of isolation, Japan felt a need to catch up industrially to the rest of the world, and so, political power was consolidated under the restored Emperor of Japan, ending shogunate rule of the country. This was called the Meiji Restoration. Now, the history of this period is very complex and extremely interesting, but far outside the scope of this video to really delve into. For our purposes, the only thing of interest is the fact that when the Japanese looked to the European powers as an example of modernization to copy, they didn't look to the French or the British, they looked to the Germans. As the Romanist Contrarian Chronicle posted on Facebook, so they sent a bunch of diplomats and students over there to figure out what they can and bring it back, and invited a bunch of advisors to come to the home islands and engaged in a program of reconstructing Japanese culture largely along Prussian lines. German became the most commonly known European language in Japan and was used as a base language for sciences, medicine, and engineering, much like Latin was used in Europe. In fact, between 1870 and 1905, 448 Japanese students attended Berlin University alone, and nearly half of them were studying medicine. Western medicine had been brought to Japan almost exclusively by German doctors. Is it possible that Japan, when it was importing other aspects of German technology and education, also imported homosexuality? Under the shogunate, you did have homosexual relationships, but they weren't sexualities or personal identities. They were, in fact, monastic and military practices. Buddhist monastics would engage in sexual relationships with young acolytes as part of their training. Because many samurai were educated in monasteries, this practice carried on over to the military. From religious circles, same-sex love spread to the samurai class, where it was customary for a boy in the wakashu age group to undergo training in the martial arts by apprenticing to a more experienced adult man. The man was permitted, if the boy agreed, to take the boy as his lover until he came of age. This relationship, often formalized in a brotherhood contract, was expected to be exclusive, with both partners swearing to take no other male lovers. This practice, along with clerical pederasty, developed into the codified system of age-structured homosexuality known as shudo, abbreviated from wakashudo, the Tao of Wakashu. But all this changed in the Meiji period. With the collapse of the shogunates and the rise of the empire, the military structure was changed, and the samurai-wakashu relationship structure evaporated, and with them, those terminologies. In its place, an interest in sexuality and sexual attraction took over. New words came into place, including hentai and bishonen, meaning beautiful boy. Bishonen is a compound word with the prefix bi meaning beautiful, and usually connoting feminine beauty. Shonen is used to describe boys of middle and high school age. The bishonen is typically slender with clear skin, stylish hair, and distinctly feminine facial features, such as high cheekbones, but simultaneously retains a male body. It is the distinctly androgynous look that traps are described as having. This change came about because of the writings of Japanese authors and journalists like Morita Yushu, who developed a modified sexual classification based on, you guessed it, Magnus Hirschfeld's concept of sexual transitions. So right after Japan opens its borders and begins sending university students to Germany, we find the same sexual aesthetic and ideas about sexuality that had sprung up in the German and British universities. Suddenly, sexuality is no longer about one's role in society, but now it's a key to understanding what kind of person they are. All of a sudden, Hirschfeld's ideas about sex have dominated prior Japanese culture. Now, I admit that the case I made here is only indicative of a larger story, and I surely haven't exhausted all the details. So let me conclude with one last picture. Here is Hirschfeld in Japan after a conference on sexuality. Sitting to his left, the emperor's physician. So are traps gay? Whatever your answer may be, Magnus Hirschfeld, one of the men indirectly responsible for both modern homosexuality and bishonen traps in anime, has given his. So why did I make this video? Not just to finally put the trap question to rest, but also to raise an important question about homosexuality. The modern view about homosexuality is that it is an inborn characteristic, just as natural as heterosexuality. Those who question this view are held in contempt. But based on everything that we have seen in this video, I think it's time that we start questioning it. If homosexuality is so natural, then why is it that in no culture before the 19th century was there a concept of homosexual identity or of permanent homosexual relationships? If homosexuality is natural and not a cultural export, then why can we trace the homosexual subcultures across both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans back to the same source? Gay rights activists argued that homosexuality is simply a choice between consenting adults. If that's the case, then why is it that nearly all the major leaders of the homosexual movement throughout the last century and a half have either praised or been involved with pederastic relationships? If homosexuality is genetic and not the result of psychological trauma, then why is it that so many of the same-sex activists are products of abuse or broken homes? Why are these activists so often involved in secret societies or the occult? These are questions that the gay rights movement are not going to answer for you. I have done my best to answer them here. I intend to do follow-up videos where I address some of the darker realities of this cultural movement. But for now, I want to leave you with one last consideration. G.K. Chesterton, the great Christian apologist of the 20th century, was alive and writing during the later half of the Uranian movement. He wrote about and even debated many of the Uranians. He also wrote the following: "The next great heresy is going to simply be an attack on morality, and especially on sexual morality, and it is coming not from a few socialists surviving from the Fabian Society, but from the living exalting energy of the rich resolved to enjoy themselves at last. The roots of this new heresy, God knows, are as deep as nature itself, whose flower is the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eye, and the pride of life. The madness of tomorrow is not in Moscow, but much more in Manhattan." When it's quoted, this quote is often read as a general reminder of the danger of sexual immorality, especially in the modern age. But I think it's possible that G.K. Chesterton was writing not of a general threat, but of a specific one. When he said that the madness of tomorrow is in Manhattan, he felt comfortable saying that because he had seen it leave London and make its way to America himself. What if he's not just warning us about a heresy, but about the heretics who promote it? Thank you for watching. I have put my sources in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to my channel for similar content. If you would like to support me, your patronage on Patreon is appreciated. The link is in the description. I have also made a Twitter. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, the link for that is also in the description. Until next time, I'm Benedict the 17th. Go with God.